Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred. And today I'm excited to actually answer a question that I got this week. We're taking a little break from Ralph de la Rosa's book. Last time I talked about my experience with manifesting or creating your ideal life and what that looks like to find your North Star and go toward it. So you can check that out if you haven't already. But today I want to answer this wonderful question about how to say no to parts on the inside and people on the outside. And this really has to do with boundaries, which I often say is the longest class I've had in Earth School because I I was born knowing my needs and having authenticity, but then in order to have belonging, I had to sacrifice that. And I became very confused about what was mine and what was other people's. And I had a lot of cultural burden around codependency, and you've got to meet my needs, and I've got to meet your needs and just a lot of confusing messages, right? A lot of kind of black and white thinking around either I get my needs met or you get your needs met, and we're in competition. And I either need to be a doormat or I need to lash out at you and control you and make you meet my needs, right? Because when we perceive that the other person is responsible for meeting our needs, there's a real natural confusion around boundaries and where we separate and where we come together. So, this is a really great question that I think many, many people will relate to. So, when this person first asked me the question, they said, how do I say no to my parts inside? But then they expanded and said that they had a part who was expressing themselves more now that felt angry and was acting out toward other people and then causing some struggles in relationships that then, you know, were painful. And so as I was thinking about it, I thought, oh, this angry part is essentially saying no to people on the outside. And so I was saying, are you asking about saying no on the inside or saying no on the outside? And as I thought about it, I thought it's all it's not all the same, but it's all very connected. It's a parallel process, and it's the process is together. And in my experience, it's the interrelating with our parts first that then allows us to be self-led in our relationship with other people and to set boundaries that are whole, right? From our whole being, all of our parts agreeing and understanding what our needs and our authenticity is, and being able to make a confident yes or no. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the inner part, right? And the person's question was, how do I say no to parts inside? Now, I relate to this. Some examples might be, you want to say no to a part who wants to eat a third piece of cake, say. Or maybe you want to say no to an inner critic who's extreme and harsh and, just causing harm on the inside. Again, whenever we have really extreme parts, right? Whether it's a firefighter or a manager, or maybe it's an exile, right? Who's experiencing really overwhelming emotion. And spoiler alert here, there's another part that is saying no to them. Stop it, basically. This is too much. You're causing problems. Don't do this. So, in my experience, the no on the inside is coming from another part, usually a manager who's trying to manage a firefighter or an exile or another manager. And they have really good intention, right? They're trying to uh, tamp things down, not gain weight, not cause problems on the outside, not be in a world of pain on the inside, right? So they have really good intention. But in my experience, the self does not say, no, stop it. In my experience, on the inside, the self says, yes, and, or sometimes tell me more. There's a going toward a curiosity about why an extreme part makes sense. So if there's a part who wants to eat a third piece of cake, instead of the self saying, stop it, don't do that, right? That would be another manager part. But what the self would say is, ah, I see you. You really want this third piece of cake. Tell me about it. Tell me what you're afraid would happen if you didn't eat it. And then it listens to the part and listens to how it makes sense. So that part might say, if I didn't eat this piece of cake, I would feel this terrible, uncomfortable feeling inside. I'm basically like trying to numb that feeling. Like, oh, okay, can I go to the part who's feeling the feeling and be with them lovingly, for a few moments? And then if you still need to, you can come in. There's no, the self doesn't try to control a part or force it to stop. It more listens to why it's doing it and then offers potential solutions that the part can agree to or not, right? So parts always have their full autonomy, their free will. And the self kind of negotiates or offers experiments. Now, that cake eating part might say something else. It might say, if I don't eat this cake, I'll never have cake again. And then the self will get curious about that. Maybe there's another part who is the restricting part, the one who's saying, stop it, don't do that, who doesn't allow the system to enjoy cake or enjoy good things. So the other part is extreme. It's like, I got to get all the cake while I can. Or maybe it's a young part who was restricted by parents, wasn't allowed to eat, or maybe had deprivation of some kind, and so needs to be updated that you don't have that deprivation. And maybe you need to go and work with the manager part, the restricting part, to say we've got to allow the system to enjoy sometimes and have freedom. Otherwise, it's going to pull in the opposite direction and binge, right? Because there is a burden system's way of trying to achieve balance, these two extreme sides. So the self kind of sees all of the parts and negotiates with them and updates them and heals the parts that are stuck in the past, right? Witnesses and unburdens them so that the system can then go forward as a unit in unity. So the self just listens to how it makes sense and how it can help, proposes things, right? So um, I often will call this nonviolent communication on the inside, right? So let's say it's an inner critic part, right? And other parts, understandably, dislike the inner critic and are like, stop it. Just, and a lot of people will give you that advice. You tell that inner critic, you stop that now, right? But that's just another manager who's trying to manage it. And instead, the self will get curious. That to me, the spirit of nonviolent communication is I'm getting really curious. Like, let's say you're the mediator between two conflicting people on the outside. You're getting really curious about how they each make sense and what are the needs and the values underneath this person. So you see their emotions on the outside or their actions, how they're acting out in extreme ways, but you're getting curious about what is the root, what's underneath. Is there some unhealed trauma there? Is there an unmet need? Is there an untrue thought? Right? And then you're trying to address that so that they can naturally relax because when our needs are met, we're not burdened, right? We are free to give and to be and to thrive. So we get curious about what's the need. So when we have polarized parts on the inside, one who wants to eat the cake and one who wants to restrict, or one who wants to be harsh on the inside and thinks that that strategy is going to protect, and another one that's like, stop it. We get curious, we understand that it's not either or, that they both are protecting some kind of need or value. So we can have equanimity and we can say, I value you both, let's come to the table. Let me hear your needs, and then we'll create a strategy that meets all of your needs, right? So, in the case of the person who asked this question, I think what they were saying is that they have this really angry part that ends up lashing out and expressing itself towards yet another person, and then that's not received well. There's a rift in the relationship. But that the part that's angry is protecting uh, parts who don't want to be patronized, don't want to be told what to do and be treated like a child and not given autonomy, right? So the angry one is I always say I have a soft spot for angry parts because they have such love and loyalty to your own vulnerable parts. So it's saying, and it's basically saying there's an unmet need here in our relationship with this person in front of us. They're not meeting our need to be valued and respected and for autonomy, right? To really make our own choices. They're treating us like a child. And so, because we have these unmet needs, our part naturally rises up in response, in anger. And so rather than that, letting that part lead and lashing out at the other person, Marshall Rosenberg, who developed nonviolent communication, says when we lash out in any kind of way, it's basically I love this expression, it's a tragic expression of our unmet need. And it's tragic because we're not likely to get our need met in that way. The other person's going to get defensive, lash back out, and now we don't have our need for value and autonomy met. So the way to get the need met is not to this other part to suppress the angry one and say, bad, bad, stop it, you're going to cause problems. You recognize that part, right? And you say, I see you. I see your concern. The lashing out, the tragic expression is causing problems. You're right. But this angry one needs to be heard so that we can address the unmet need underneath. And then once they're helped, they can relax. Can you let me go to them? Yeah, I want that too. Cool. And so then you can go to the angry one. So the key is really as the self turning toward the angry one because it needs to vent, it needs to express and say, there's an unmet need here. And if you can turn toward it and give it attention, then it doesn't have to lash out and get it from someone else. So let it vent. Let it say, how dare this person, treat me like a child? How dare they not recognize my value? How dare they not, allow me the freedom to choose what I want for myself or, whatever it is. You let them say that because that's giving you information about what the unmet need is. And then you can validate that. You're right. You are valuable. We are valuable. And this treatment is not okay. And you want people to treat you more in alignment with your value and to allow you to have autonomy. And so that unmet need makes you upset and you make complete sense. So now that you've listened to that, you can say, okay, how can we constructively and creatively get that need met? And brainstorm a creative way. And sometimes just speaking for the part to the other person. Okay, so now the inner work has been done. Now is where you come out to the other person to say no or to express your need in some kind of way. But because you've listened to all the parts inside around it and you haven't told them no, you've gotten curious with them. Now you're actually, because they've been heard, you might more likely have self energy towards the other person and feel curious about their competing need. That doesn't negate the fact that you are your own primary caregiver and your greatest responsibility is to care for the needs of yourself. That doesn't mean that you're putting yourself above other people. You're keeping your value and their value equal, but you have the most capacity to care for your own needs. And so that's your responsibility. And their responsibility is to care for theirs. Right. And so, um, So when you now come towards the other person, you can speak for the parts and say, when you spoke this way, I had a part rise up that got really angry, I noticed, because it just really wants to protect my value and my autonomy. Like I want to be valued and seen as an autonomous adult and to make my own decisions, right? So you're just speaking for the part, and that sounds a lot different than you terrible, awful person, how dare you, right? When we're speaking as the part, other people's systems, their protective parts then come up. But when we speak for the part, when this happened, I noticed a part who felt angry because it was protecting this. You give the person more of a chance to have a little distance and maybe value you. Now, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to value you. They may still not be able to meet your need, but because yourself has recognized the need and values you and your autonomy, you have less of a need for them to validate it. And you can understand that if they can't, it has to do with them and not with you. If they're not in a position to value you or meet your need of autonomy, it's because they have some competing need in them, right? Where they're using this tragic expression of their unmet need to try to control you or belittle you. And again, because they have a reason why they're doing that, and that's their protective parts, doesn't mean that it's okay for them to do that or that you need to stay and allow it. It's not doormat or aggression. It's listen to the unmet need. You find a strategy to meet the unmet need, which sometimes the strategy is distance from that person. And that can be difficult if you have parts who are like, but I have to be, I have to please this person or I have to be around this person. And then those are the parts that you really want to work with. And that's very, very common, definitely in my system. So I wanted to give an example of this, of once you've worked with the parts in your system that are activated, I love what Marshall Rosenberg says of if you cannot bring yourself to have compassion or curiosity, at least about the person in front of you, you must turn it towards yourself first. So if the parts are noticing there's a part lashing out at them, I do not feel compassionate or curious toward them, you've got to turn it toward that part in you first. Okay. Then once that part feels heard, and all the parts feel heard and can relax a little bit, then you can speak for the parts to the other person and get curious about their needs. Um, and now, as far as saying no, though, to the person in front of you, again, there can be really burdened parts around this, culturally burdened, legacy burdens, personal burdens, where the message you got growing up repeatedly, my parts relate to this, was you cannot say no to the person in front of you without jeopardizing your own safety and well-being and acceptance from others. And so there's just layers of burdening that keep your system from saying no. Now, for me, I've done so much inner exploration and unburdening with parts on this that I can say no to people now, but I still have parts who struggle to ask for my needs to be met. Um, my husband and I were laughing about we were at a Vietnamese restaurant and we love Vietnamese food, but and every time we go to a restaurant and they ask what I want to drink, I always want water. I don't prefer any other drink. And I prefer water with lemon, but I cannot bring myself to say water with lemon because there's a part who's like, I'm already not ordering a drink. I can't put them out more and ask them to put a lemon on it. I I mean, that's selfish. That's, obnoxious. There's still a part that's like, I can't ask for that, right? So even though now I can say no when something doesn't align with my own value or my authenticity, it's still hard to ask for things. It's another step. We're getting there. But so it's one thing, let's say, someone makes a request. Let me give some examples on this end and the outside end of saying no or setting a boundary with someone. Maybe someone says, "Can you help me move on Saturday?" And you have so much going on, you're exhausted, you just don't want to, whatever it is, that's a good enough reason. Um, it can be hard to say no because you don't want them to feel disappointed, right? But really taking the time, not making a need, whenever you have a knee-jerk yes or a knee-jerk no, it means that there's likely a burdened part that's answering for you. So creating space between a person's request and your response is a really good practice, even if it's just like a breath at first, to really check in. Like, what is my authentic choice? Because let's say I have a friend moving and I love spending time with them. I'm so excited that they're moving. I have energy, I have space in my life right now. And when they ask me to move, I feel my body go, oh, yes, like a genuine yes, I would love to do that. Right. Now, let's say I've had a really stressful week. There's a lot of other things going on. I love this person, but I'm exhausted. And when they ask if I can help them move, my body goes, oh, right? There's that aversion response. So the first thing is I want enough space to really detect what the response is in that moment, because it's not an all the time when people ask me to move, I must say yes, or all the time when people ask me to move, I will always say no. It's checking in that moment, right? So it's being able to be present, listen to the parts, and there may be conflicting parts. Often the parts appear in my head or have the shoulds and the rules, and they're like, you should do this. They helped you. This is the nice thing to do. You want to be seen as a good friend. Like, those are all the thoughts that are going on. But the most authentic thing that values me is my body's response. If my body goes yes or no, and sort of being truthful to that. So you might have to work with the parts who have all these thoughts as well. But let's say my body says, "Oh, I can't do that." So now how do I say no to the other person? So one important thing is kind of like Mel Robbins' let them theory, to let them be disappointed in the no, let them feel sad about it, have some kind of reaction about it. Um, but to know that your no, your authentic no, is always a gift to the other person, even if they have, a negative response, because you cannot have genuine relationship with people unless you are allowed to be authentic, to say yes when you mean yes and no when you mean no, because that's the truth of your capacity, right? So if this friend is, it's going to jeopardize your actual friendship for you to say an authentic no, then you might come to grips with the fact that this is not necessarily a safe friend or a friend that is sustainable, because you can't truly be yourself around this person. Now they can feel disappointed. That's natural, right? But then ultimately accept it. So in a healthy relationship, you can check in with yourself, say no. You might say, "Oh, I would really love to help you, but I'm so exhausted. I have so much going on this week. It's not a good time for me. Maybe I can help you organize stuff next week, or I can bring you a meal," or like something that you do feel like is a genuine yes. You can say an alternative thing. Um, Now this is in a healthy relationship, right? And the other person might feel like disappointed. Oh man, I don't know how I'm going to find help, but I get it, but they accept it. Now there's also relationships that are not healthy, where essentially the dynamic of the relationship is such that they have learned that you always say yes to them, and if you don't, they essentially punish you, right? Shame you, punish you verbally, physically, all kinds of ways, right? And you might go back and watch. I have videos about givers and takers and being in relationship, and it's this dynamic of the one person saying, you know, uh, you need to give to me, and this person saying, I need to give to you. So it's very lopsided, but it's they both agree. And so those are the parts of you that believe that you need to give to the other person at your own expense, or else that is your responsibility to explore and listen to on the inside for you. And once you have done that inner work, you'll realize, oh, this, once your parts feel really valued by you inside, there'll be a recognition this person is not valuing me. There's a discrepancy there. And so you might naturally say, I need to, in order to value myself, create some distance with this person. And there's a lot of grief in that. And I was, my example, I was thinking, there's both. When you have um, backlash, or when you say no in your system, right? You say no, or you just think about saying no, and you feel like this fear of shame and guilt and punishment on the inside. You want to check and say, is that a legitimate reality right now with this person? Or was it something that happened in the past and not necessarily with the person in front of me? And can I test it out with this person to see if they're going to punish me or not? And if you give your truth to someone and they punish you, you don't give more truth to them. You create distance if you value yourself. Um, or you might give them a little bit and they handle it really well. And then you can give more of your truth and be more and more authentic and have more and more healthy relationships, because a healthy person wants you to be yourself. Um, but an unhealthy one does not want you to be yourself. They want you to just steamroll over your own needs and give to them. And again, that's their own protective parts, but you're worth more than that. Um, so, I was going to give an example, okay, about this. So, for example, in my first marriage, which was abusive, and I got into it because I had low self-worth, because I believed that it was sinful and shameful to love myself and value myself, and that I was actually more valuable if I sacrificed myself for people in front of me. And then my first husband believed that I needed to sacrifice myself for him and that his needs were more important than mine. So we kind of agreed there. And so I was thinking about an example. I was thinking, what is something where I felt like I always felt like I had to please him or else, right? So maybe he asked me to have some people watch our kids that I didn't feel comfortable with, that I didn't really know. I didn't feel safe. There were some indications that there might be drug use or different things, and I just didn't want these people to watch my kids. And I definitely felt it, very strong aversion response in my body. Now, this is complicated because it's like, well, they're both our kids, so who decides, right? Now, in a healthy relationship, I would have been able to express that this made me feel really concerned, and then my partner would meet those concerns. Say, "Oh, okay, I see your fears. I value that. Let me give you information that helps meet those concerns so that you can naturally say yes to this." Or they would say, okay, if you're not comfortable with it, let's find someone else, right? So there's a valuing of both in a healthy relationship. But in my first marriage, it was like, no, you do whatever I want. And if you express a no or even a hesitancy, I'm going to verbally attack you, tell you that you're this terrible, awful, evil, cuss you out, person. And I'm going to threaten violence, threaten to physically hurt you. I'm going to threaten to take the children away from you. I'm going to demean your character. I'm going to tell other people bad things about you. Just all kinds of punishments and consequences if I were to express any kind of dissent. So the truth was that there was a legitimate consequence in any kind of abusive relationship, whether it's a parent, a boss, a partner, like that's the case. If you dissent, you're going to have huge punishment on you. So it makes sense that your fawning, pleasing parts have to come out to protect you, and they're doing their job for a reason. Now, once I got out of that relationship and I valued myself enough and I created distance, and now I'm in this loving, healthy relationship with Brian. I still, whenever I have a differing opinion or want to say no because of my capacity or dissent, this fear comes up of I'm going to be punished. I'm going to be hurt if I do this. And I have to remind those parts that Brian has never punished me, never done any of those things. And they kind of go, oh yeah, yeah, that's right. Like they sometimes regularly need to be updated and reminded that this is the current situation is different. The current relationship is healthy. And then if they're still concerned, I'll say, well, let's try it a little bit, dissent a little bit, and see how he handles it. And he always handles it beautifully, right? And cares about my part's concerns, listens to them, tries to, meet their concerns or create a different, strategy where we're both being considered, right? So, um, yeah, it really is important to assess the relationship that you have in front of you, because if there's a person who is unsafe that you're interacting with, and that angry part comes out and is like, stop it, heck no, right? Well, it might get backlash from that person and not be safe. But it also might not need to be coming out that strongly. It might um, be able to just, you know, the self listen to it and then speak to the person, and they're able to kind of have nonviolent communication on the outside and say, okay, these are your needs, these are my needs. What's a creative solution? Maybe I can't meet your needs, maybe you can't meet mine, but I value your needs. And, let's go forward. It doesn't, my parts, last thing I'll say here, my parts have been so, they're just so stuck, they have been so stuck in black and white of like it's either me or you, that sometimes I'll get confused and I'll be like, but what do I do when my need competes with another person? Because I've been so trained that I have to trample my need when another person's need competes with it. But ultimately, our needs are not competing. They can coexist. What competes is the strategy to meet the need. So if I think my need, this person has to be the one to meet my need, then that can be difficult if they have a competing need and they can't. But if I say, um, you know, I'm not feeling well enough to go on this excursion today, so perhaps you can, if you still want to go, you can. I'm not keeping you from going, but I might need to stay back. Or it's like finding a creative way. It might not be ideal, but both of our needs are still being met. I hope that makes sense, because it's taken my system so long to understand it, but it's so freeing to understand we're not competing. And I don't have to sacrifice my needs for you, and you don't have to sacrifice your needs for me. Ultimately, we might have to separate if we have totally competing needs, but that's okay. We're just not meant to, to be together. We're not able to meet each other's needs. Um, but maybe there are a different time, a different place, a different way that we can come together and have our needs met. Okay, so I hope you appreciated that. This is I, kind of something that I've talked about several times on this channel. It's just something that I think my system has had to learn over time. And um, if you have parts that are coming up that are like, but what about this? But what about that? Have questions, feel free to put those in the comments. If you have learned some of these things or something different, please feel free to share that also. Let's see. Let's do, if you have watched this far, you can put in the comments like some kind of symbol that means no, right? So it could be like an anti-sign, a stop sign. Is there a stop sign? I don't know. Or like a hand like this, or you could write no in quotes. I'll know what you mean. And that means that you've watched to the end. And so if you have, thank you so much. And I hope you process this, you have a beautiful inner relationship with your parts, and then are able to have a self-led, unified front to value you and your authenticity with other people, and to value theirs and get curious about them too. All right, see you next time.